Employers who are taking precautions due to COVID-19 have the option of delaying the in-person physical inspection requirements for purposes of Form I-9. Under those circumstances, if their employee or employees are working remotely on a consistent and predictable basis, they are able to onboard those employees remotely. These temporary flexibilities do not alleviate an employer's obligation to timely complete the Form I-9. What these flexibilities do is provide an alternative that's approved by the DHS on how the employer inspects the employee's identity and work authorization documents. These temporary flexibilities do not alleviate the employer's obligation to timely complete the Form I-9. In fact, the employer is still required to administer the Form I-9 pursuant to the regular guidance. The employee must complete Section 1 by the first business day of work. The employer must still complete Section 2 within 3 business days following the employee's first day of work. So Section 2 is the section that deals with the employer's attestation that they have examined the employee's identity and work authorization documents. Before the implementation of the guidance, employers were required to conduct these examinations in the employee's physical presence. As a result of these temporary flexibilities, if an employer is remotely onboarding its employees, that employer is allowed to review these identity documents via fax, email, or video link. When remotely inspecting the documents, the employer must make a notation inside Section 2's additional information section and state remote inspection completed on and provide the month, the day, and the year, and the initials of the person performing the inspection. Once the employee resumes a non-remote work status on a predictable, regular, and consistent basis, the employer has 3 days to complete the in-person physical inspection requirements. When the employer completes the inspection, at that time, the employer is required to examine the employee's documents, and they must be the original documents and they must be unexpired. Then the employer must make a notation in the additional sections box, and the notation must read, COVID-19 documents physically examined on, and provide the month, the day, the year, and the initials of the inspecting personnel. So what's interesting about this temporary flexibility is it imposes an additional requirement for employers. Employers who avail themselves of this temporary flexibility must also maintain or at least create a policy or memorandum capturing its telework policy, its remote onboarding policy, and they have to maintain it for each one of the employees. ICE has been very clear that if they were to conduct some inspection as a result of this remote onboarding, that it is on the employer to provide a written memorandum or policy capturing its telework and onboarding practices. So ICE does not provide any justification as to why they have implemented the policies beyond stating as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and employers taking physical proximity precautions. ICE has decided to exercise discretion. And ICE has been very clear that any violations as a result of the completion of the Form I-9, technical or otherwise, an employer will be responsible. As a result, it's best for employers to approach this remote onboarding as conservative as possible. ICE has been clear that the whole purpose of these flexibilities is as a result of COVID-19 and the pandemic and the precautions that employers are taking to protect its employees. The other thing is, it's important for employers to continue to treat employees the same consistently across the board. So you can't choose to remote inspect some and not others if both individuals, and I say both individuals, both employees are both working remotely, right? So you need to have an even-handed distribution of your policy. The guidance does not require the employer to be exclusively remote, at least not under the current guidance, right? But if you do have employees who meet the criteria, they're working in a remote setting consistently on a predictable basis during this pandemic, then the employer needs to have an even-handed distribution on how it is going to execute its telework policy and verify the employee's identity documents. If an employee is hired and they're not exercising or working in a remote environment as a result of the pandemic, then it's business as usual. Employers must physically inspect the original unexpired documents in the employee's physical presence. Depending on the size of the employer's workforce, they could have a significant number of backlogged Form I-9s for the employees that were remotely onboarded. It is advisable that an employer make every effort to alleviate the backlog. The way to do so is to exercise discretion and call in employees and either perform the in-person physical inspection of the employee's identity and work authorization documents, or have an authorized representative of the employer perform the inspection for them. The employer must carefully examine the I-9 and ensure the forms are timely and properly completed. ICE has warned that the employer is liable for any violations in connection with the form or the verification process, including any violations of the employer-sanctioned laws committed by the person designated to act on the employer's behalf. If it's possible, I would encourage employers to have their employees come in. They can still exercise social distancing precautions, complete the verification process. It really does not take that long, and then allow the employee to go back home to work. It's important to remember, again, if employees remain remote and the employer has only performed a remote inspection, at the conclusion of these flexibilities, meaning if ICE terminates these flexibilities, then the employer only has 3 days to call back its workforce and perform these inspections.